In this story, we again hear about another widow. Jesus and his band of disciples, as well as a larger crowd, were traveling to Jerusalem. As their procession came close to the city of Nain, they encountered another procession that was coming out of the city. It was a funeral procession. This death procession literally runs into the life procession of Jesus' ministry. Listen what happens when death is met with the life-giving grace of God. Soon afterwards, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. And as he approached the gate of the town, a man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. And with her was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion for her and said to her, "Do not weep." And then he came forward and touched the bier, the wooden plank on which the man was lying. And the bearers who were holding the plank stood still. And he said, "Young man," Jesus said to him, "Young man, I say to you, rise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favorably on God's people." This word about Jesus spread throughout Judea and all the surrounding country. Now this is the word of the Lord. School's out. Yeah. What? Got maybe one more day, but for the most part, school's out, right? Yay. Well, and we got warmer weather here. I can see folks doing the fanning business already. We're not quite into July yet. The vacations are being planned and graduations have been held. Of course, Joanna would like to remind folks that Joanna graduated last night from high school. Send her off with blessings from our congregation. The grass is green with all this wet weather we've been having, and the slower days of summer are here. Life seems, for the most part, really pretty good, don't you think? That is all true until we turn on the TV or listen to the news on the radio or check the internet for the media reports on what is still going on in the Gulf of Mexico. It is tragic to watch as the seagulls and pelicans and other wildlife are being rescued from their oily graves, trying to breathe. It's painful to watch the ocean waves breaking on the shore of the wetlands in Louisiana, coating the reeds with crude oil that will surely cover the beaches of 4 coastal states, devastating not only their fisheries and wildlife, but also the economy and the jobs of people who live there. The future looks bleak, and there does not seem to be any good news coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Instead, it looks like a long, steady death procession for weeks, months, years, and perhaps decades to come. But it's not just the Gulf Coast that plagues us right now. If we drill deeply into the depths of our own hearts and souls, we'll find there broken places, our relationships, our economic concerns, our failed attempts at keeping sadness or grief at bay, or the worry that we have over a loved one. And we, like that widow in Nain, who was walking the death processional out of the city with her only son, her only means of support, her only way of life, perhaps like her, we too put our hands to our faces and say, what now? What now? What are we going to do? The widow in Nain, you probably know about widows in the ancient time. When they were widows and had no one to support her, they were truly on their own death march. They had no one to support them or care for them. So not only is she burying her only son, she is also walking out of town feeling pretty lifeless, as we all do at one time or another, find ourselves in need of something or someone to hold on to give us hope in the face of despair. Maybe just a little bit of hospitality to keep us from going over the brink. In a story from 1 Kings that was read earlier this morning, the widow who meets Elijah was in a very desperate state herself. She and her son, which was also her only son, had only a small amount of flour and oil left to make their last meal. After that last meal, the widowed mother knew that there would only be death and starvation waiting them. But Elijah assures her that if she only shared from the little that she had, that he would make sure that God would keep her flour from running out and the cooking oil overflowing. The widow, facing her death anyway, chose to face death with hospitality coursing through her heart rather than turn a hungry prophet away. As a result, out of her scarcity, she was blessed with more life as she cooked her cakes and gave some to Elijah and to her son. What looked like certain death from scarcity and starvation turned into life by the abundant grace of a loving and merciful God. Likewise, our story from Luke's Gospel begins by painting a picture of another funeral procession coming out of the city of Nain, while Jesus and his life-giving procession are approaching the city on their way to Jerusalem. Life and death are on a collision course. Jesus had just delivered his sermon on the plain right before they set out for Jerusalem. And this is the first miracle of Jesus following that sermon, which makes it a very important event in biblical circles. Scripture tells us that when Jesus sees the widow, he is moved by compassion for her. Now, the Greek word that is translated here as compassion actually means that Jesus felt this deep in his own gut, like a painful cramp in his intestines. He was so moved by her grief, he absolutely had to do something about it because it hurt him in the depth of his own being. It really was literally a case of, I feel your pain. And so what did Jesus do? He gets up close and personal with this widow who doesn't have a clue as to what to expect. Just notice, though, in this story, no one approaches Jesus in the story. The widow whose son had died does not plead with Jesus or touch the hem of his prayer shawl or call out to him. She is simply doing what any other mother would do who had lost a child. Even if it was an adult child, she was grieving deeply and inconsolably. The crowd following her did not press in on Jesus, asking him to intervene on her behalf. The disciples following Jesus did not expect Jesus to do anything for her. After all, they did not know her or her son. But Jesus sees this woman, this widow, with knowing eyes.